Morning, ma'am. I am Narmina Edalimbang, the third reporter of the Module 6. So my topic is all about the disjunctive syllogism. A disjunctive syllogism is one whose major premise is a disjunctive proposition, whose minor premise, sublets, or posits one or more members of the major premise and whose conclusion posits or sublets the other member or members. So in logic, the other term of disjunctive syllogism in historically known as modus tollentido ponens or MTP, Latin for mode that affirms by denying, is a valid argument form which is a syllogism having a disjunctive statement for one of its premises. So the other definition of disjunctive syllogism is it is a hypothetical syllogism in which the major premise is a disjunctive proposition. The example of this is either he is a criminal or he is a non-criminal, but he is a criminal. Therefore, he is not a non-criminal. So next, disjunctive proposition. A disjunctive proposition is one that presents various alternatives and asserts that an indeterminate one of them is true. It consists of two or more members joined by the conjunctions either, or it is sometimes called an alternative proposition. So the example of disjunctive proposition, for instance, Canada is in North America, or New York City is the biggest city in Canada. Now we have one proposition that is true, so that whole things is seen as true. So they have a strict disjunctive. In a disjunctive proposition, in the strict or proper sense, only one member is true and the others are false. If all the members except one are false, the remaining member must be true. And if one member is true, the remaining member must be false. For instance, every position is either true or false. Every number is either 100 or more than 100 or else or less than 100, and it is either raining or no raining. A proposition and its contradictionary may always be asserted in a disjunctive proposition in a strict sense. Board disjunctive. In a disjunctive proposition in the board or improper sense, at least one member is true, but more than one may be true. For instance, the proposition, either my brought or I will go, can mean that at least one of us will go, but possibly both of us will go. Often we must decide whether a proposition is a disjunctive in the strict or in the broad sense by consideration of the matter and by the content. So here is the other meaning of the proposition. The disjunctive proposition are reducible to a series of conditional propositions. To avoid repetition, we shall postpone our treatment of the reduction of disjunctive to conditional proposition until we take the reduction of disjunctive syllogism to conditional syllogism. So here are the kinds of roles. Disjunctive syllogism in the strict sense. In a disjunctive syllogism in the strict sense, the major premise must be a disjunctive proposition in the strict or proper sense. The minor premise either posits or sublets one or more but not all of the members of the major premise. In the conclusion, there are two possible procedures. If the minor premise posits one or more members of the major premise, the conclusion must sublet each of the other members under members. For instance, the number is either 100 or more than 100 or less than 100, but the number is 100. Therefore, the number is either more nor less than the 100. If the minor premise sublets one more than of the member of the major premise, the conclusion possesses the remaining members, one of which must be true. If more than one member remains, the conclusion must be a disjunctive proposition in the strict sense. For instance, the number is either 100 or more than 100 or less than 100. But the number is not 100. Therefore, the number is either more than 100 or less than 100. Every procedure besides those indicated under A and B is invalid. You may not posit one member and then posit another, or sublets one member and then sublets all the members. So here is the disjunctive in the broad sense. In a disjunctive syllogism in the broad sense, the major premise is a disjunctive proposition. In the broad or improper sense, there is only one valid procedure to sublets one or more but not at all of the member in the minor and posit the remaining member or members. In the conclusion, if more than one members remain, the conclusion itself must be disjunctive proposition in the broad sense. For instance, it is either E or B or C or D, at least one of them, but it is either E nor B. Therefore, it is either C or D, at least one of them. A disjunctive theory of action claims that if an item is an event in the broad sense, either is a mere event in the narrow sense, or is an intrinsic event in the narrow sense, or is an action. So that's all about my report, and thank you for listening.
Conjunctive syllogism. As a conjunctive syllogism is one whose major premise is a conjunctive proposition whose minor premise posits one member of the major and whose conclusion sublets the other member of the major. Example of conjunctive proposition: one cannot be wealthy and poor at the same time. You cannot serve but God and money. A. Conjunctive proposition. A conjunctive proposition is one that denies the simultaneous possibility of two alternatives. For instance, you cannot eat your cake and have it. No man can serve both God and mammon. A thing cannot both be and not be in the same respect. A conjunctive proposition can be expressed in the formula not both A and, as well as in the formula either not A or not B and maybe neither. We see this in English with the use of the words and or. For instance, if we want to know that both propositions grouped together are true, we use the word and. This is called a conjunctive proposition. For instance, rule for conjunctive syllogism. There is only one valid procedure: to posit one member in the minor premise and sublet the other in the conclusion. Two examples will make this rule clear. He cannot be in Chicago and St. Louis at the same time, but he is now in Chicago. Therefore, he cannot now be in St. Louis. He cannot be in Chicago and St. Louis at the same time, but he is not in Chicago. Therefore, he is in St. Louis. In conjunctive syllogism, only one of the components can be true, but both can be false. Hence, if one is affirmed, it necessarily entails that one must be denied. However, if one is denied, it does not necessarily entail that one must be affirmed, for both of them can be denied without contradiction. This proposition alleges an incompatibility between two cases, one of which is affirmed in order to eliminate the other. Example of violation of this rule: one cannot be wealthy, poor at the same time. But you are not wealthy, therefore you are poor. Invalid. It doesn't mean that because you are not wealthy that you are already poor. Reduction of disjunctives and conjunctives to conditional. These disjunctive and conjunctive propositions are reducible to a series of conditional propositions. Notice that a disjunctive in the strict Sense says all that both disjunctive in the broad sense and conjunctive says the negative implementation, but not both, is expressed by the conjunctive.